Hey, everybody. I'm Rebecca from Thieving at Our Farm,
And I'm Leo with Southern Biophiliac Urban Farm.
and we are two chicks Caturnix bringing you the scoop
Not the poop.
on Caturnix quail. So it is hatching season. It is spring, and everybody's excited, and everybody is getting their incubators and ordering eggs and hatching chicks.
Hatching's
And
my favorite.
oh my gosh, it never gets old. I don't care how many times I hatch. I mean, like I literally hatch out like 500 chicks a week or more. It's still it's my favorite day.
Me too.
Unfortunately, sometimes it ends up being a little bit of a disappointment.
Yes.
And as quail breeders, Leah, you know that we get a lot of messages this time of year.
A lot. Yes, definitely.
So, we thought it might be good to talk about, troubleshooting and what can go wrong. And we do have some other videos that go along with as well. I do recommend, if you haven't watched it yet, watch our Incubating for Dummies video. We also have a video on assisting the hatch. I think those would be really helpful, but we're going to talk about some of those things today and see, maybe if we can help you guys have a better hatch. So, Leah, let's talk first about, I think one of the biggest things, I don't know about you, but one of the biggest things when I receive an email or a message about a disappointed hatch rate is people think their eggs aren't fertilized. So I think we should talk about that.
Yeah. So there's a big difference between lack of fertility and the lack of eggs developing. So, and the only way you can know if an egg is not fertile is to actually open it up before you even set it in the incubator.
Yeah. And that's important to know. I'll get people that will incubate their eggs fully, and they'll have some that don't hatch, and they will break them open and they'll send me pictures of the little blastoderm. And generally, like you said, if before you incubate, if you open an egg and look at it, you can see a little bullseye on the ones that are fertilized. But what people don't understand is that when an egg is incubated, with that heat and time, that little blastoderm breaks down and you won't see that bullseye anymore. So the egg may have been fertilized, but because of various things that can happen, and we'll go into those, it just didn't develop.
Right.
So, yeah. So let's talk first. A lot of people get their eggs shipped. So,
Yes. And shipping is always a gamble.
yes. So let's talk about, I think that people sometimes get the idea that if we put a bunch of fragile stickers or, like hatching egg stickers or handle with care or all these things that like, I don't know, that maybe the postman is like carrying it on like a little feather
Right.
pillow.
Right. Like I can say like my personal post office, they're super awesome.
Yes.
Like I have the lady at the counter and she's always gently carrying my boxes. But after they're passed on to the next person, you just don't know.
Yeah. Well, it's good to know. They go into a giant bin, and those bins get loaded onto a semi, and then they're like dumped onto conveyor belts and go through sorting machines. They're tumbled, they're dropped, they're shook. They go through X-ray machines.
Some of them
Um,
get to fly on airplanes.
yes, you're getting different temperatures, humidities. You're getting temperature fluctuations. I mean, like pretty much if it could go wrong, it is going wrong. Not to mention the fact that I don't know about your experience with shipping eggs, but I know my experience is that even if you pay for expedited shipping, it's not always expedited shipping.
Right. Not
So,
always.
and one thing that people don't understand is that once an egg is laid, you have a short amount of time to start incubating that egg before the viability starts to go away. So
Right.
As breeders, we need time to collect the eggs. I know that, both of us practice, good collecting, and that we don't ship anything. For me, I don't ship anything over 3 days old.
Same.
And most of the time they're not even a day old, because I don't know about you this time of year. I'm pulling those eggs like soon as they're laid. They're hot off the press. They're going in
Yeah.
the box. They're getting go. So you have to have people waiting for eggs. So if those eggs get delayed by UPS and they're sitting in some hub somewhere, that can affect your hatch rate too, and that can make eggs not develop.
Definitely. I mean, generally, you won't start losing viability until after day 10. But
Mhm.
yeah, I know both of us, we try to get them out as fast as possible.
Oh yeah, I shipped eggs last month, beginning of the month, and they still haven't arrived. So, and now I will say most of the time I don't have any problems. The eggs arrive within a great time frame, and people, get their eggs, and they rest their eggs, and then they start incubating. But sometimes USPS drops the ball. Okay, so I mentioned resting.
Yeah, I was going to say we need to talk
Let's
about
let's
resting.
talk about resting, because that's important.
Yes. So it's important to rest those eggs after you receive them for at least 24 hours. And the reason being is because when they've been jostled around and going through shipping, there is a chance that that air sac that's in that egg for that chick has been jostled around as well. And
Mhm.
that's going to give it time to settle back into place.
And how do you recommend, like, resting is not only it important, but you have to do it a certain way. So what do you recommend for how to rest the eggs?
So they need to be pointy end down. Usually, I know with how both of us ship the eggs, how they're sitting in that foam is how they should be resting.
Yep. So pointy end down, so that keeps the air cell up at the top of the blunt end, and you rest your eggs. How long do you rest them?
At least 24 hours.
Yep. And you don't want to do too much past 24 hours, because then again, talking about that window of how long your eggs are viable, if I've had people that have rested their eggs over the weekend because they're like, "Oh, I don't want to set them until Monday or whatever." It's like, "Ah."
Yeah. Please get them in. Yeah, get them cooking.
Um, all right. So another thing that I see is people rest their eggs, let's say, like you said, in the foam upright. They did all the right things. They rested them for 24 hours, and then they take them out and they candle them. Or they hand them to their kids who want to look at the pretty spots in the eggs, and you're turning the eggs and jostling them around and pretty much undoing everything.
Everything.
So, if you want to candle your eggs, or if you want your kids to look at the eggs, do that before you rest them, because
Yes.
otherwise it's like just undoing everything. Um all right. So we've talked about resting, talk about candling. I
We
think the
got to
next
talk about incubators.
yes. Okay. So when I'm troubleshooting with people, that's one of the first things that I ask is, what kind of incubator do you have?
Same.
All incubators are created equal, aren't they, Leah?
No, far from equal.
Did you learn that the hard way like I did?
I sure did. Multiple times too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I have tried just about every cheap incubator on Amazon and at Tractor Supply. And
And if you're going to take the chance to buy like expensive eggs, treat them that way.
yes. Yes. Okay, so I I was feeling a little snarky one day. And that changed my mind meme, that picture of the guy that's sitting at a folding table, and he has, like, it says change my mind, and he's leaning back. Yeah, the one that I made was being angry at your quail breeder because your eggs didn't hatch and you used an NR360, or like a $10 incubator from Timu, is like being mad at Martha Stewart because your cake didn't bake in your easy bake oven.
Right.
Yeah, it's so those incubators, they're just not reliable. Um, I don't know a single cheap incubator that has a reliable readout for temperature and humidity.
Same. So we tried two separate tabletops that were highly recommended before I got a cabinet incubator, and
Mhm.
neither one of them matched what the digital display said.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually had a situation where the readout said 99.5. But when I opened the incubator, like I touched the eggs and they were hot to the touch.
Oh no.
And I put in a separate thermometer and they were at 106.9.
Fun. so
So,
so you cooked them then.
yeah, yeah, I cooked my eggs. So, that's really important. If you get an incubator, it helps if you can purchase a better quality incubator. Um, and if you can't, then you have to understand that you're not going to get professional hatch rates from an entry level incubator.
Right.
Yeah. So what do you recommend as far as testing your incubator ahead of time?
So I always tell people, and even if they've had a reliable incubator for a long time, I still tell them to double check it too, but you
Mhm.
want to run it at least 24 hours prior to getting ready to set eggs. And it's definitely important to have a second check on those.
Yes. A secondary thermometer or hygrometer is a must. And it's also good to not just leave it in one place in the incubator, but to move it around because a lot of these incubators have hot spots and cold spots, and you want to make sure that your incubator is heating evenly.
Right. Because some of the ones that have the domed see-through window, a lot of times, like the further
Mhm.
out you get from the center, the colder it actually gets.
Absolutely. And you brought up a good point about setting it up and running it ahead of time and stuff. It's good to double check, even if you have a really expensive cabinet incubator,
Definitely.
because I mean, I've got some pretty nice incubators and I've had to replace parts.
Same.
I've had fans go out, thermostats go out, sensors go out, um, humidifiers go out. I mean, like if
Yes.
it can go out, I mean, they are machines and they can decide to not function. So I've had a number of people be like, "Well, I'm not new to this, and I've hatched, a bunch of
Right,
eggs,"
but
and
you
it's
could have
like,
a yeah, incubator that's done awesome for a long time, and then all of a sudden the
yes.
parts wear out, and it's just like, having a car, you gotta do maintenance, you gotta check up on it. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, okay, one more thing before we get off the subject of secondary thermometers is the quality of the thermometer hygrometer that you buy. So it never fails. Somebody will be like, well, I used a secondary one. And I'll be like, okay, well, what brand did you use? And it's like one of those little mini ones for like 50 cents on Amazon.
Yeah,
And,
right.
I'll go and so if you're buying a thermometer, you can actually look up the specs on it and they'll tell you what kind of temperature and humidity range they have. So a lot of the ones on Amazon I see with between 2 and 5 plus or minus 2 and 5 degrees off. That's
That's
a
a lot,
lot. That's a
a
lot.
lot,
And
because
often,
those degrees matter.
yes. 2 degrees doesn't sound like a lot, but if it's 2 degrees lower or 2 degrees higher, you're just not going to have a good hatch rate. And
Right.
then combine that with hot spots and cold spots in your incubator.
Yeah, it's gonna be a big mess.
Um, so yeah, I recommend ThermPro.
I do
Um,
too.
yeah. That's been the most accurate one that I've found. Unfortunately, it's just hard to find small enough incubator or small enough thermometers to fit inside your incubator that are
that are
also
accurate.
highly accurate. Yeah,
Yeah. I've
for
tried a few
sure.
others and they just weren't off.
Yeah. And I know Govey is very popular. Govey is great for tracking, like fluctuations in temperature and humidity.
I've heard the same.
But they're not always super accurate as far as the exact temperature. So if you want to use a Govey, they can be great because they can notify you if something happens, if there's a spike or a drop or you lose power or something like that. But I wouldn't necessarily rely on it to tell you that your temperature is correct.
Right. And then, the importance of having correct temperature and humidity.
Yeah, I guess we should probably talk about like what we want to look for in temperature and humidity. so,
Definitely.
um, so what ranges do you like to have?
So most of your tabletops, just because of how they're set, can only do 0.5 degrees in any direction.
Mm-hmm.
So generally, people go for 99.5 because we have a cabinet that's able to do 0.1 indifference. We're at 99.8.
Got it. And what about your humidity?
So because we're in Florida, I can dry hatch, but the
Mm-hmm.
humidity in the incubators generally stay around 35, 40
Mm-hmm.
with the dry hatch, which 40% is about where you want it in the beginning. And then we bump it up, around day 14, 15 to usually about 55.
Got it. And some things that we need to point out is I often see people that use too high of a humidity during incubation,
Yes.
and that can cause some problems.
Yes.
So, what are your thoughts on that?
So if it's too high, so we talked about that little air sac and that getting jostled around and, letting your eggs rest so that air sac gets back into place. Well, that air sac is super important because that's the baby chick's lifeline before they exit the egg.
Mm-hmm.
So during incubation, that air cell needs to get bigger so that the chick has enough air to make the journey to the outside world. So if you have too high of a humidity, that doesn't allow that air sac to fully develop properly, and the chicks can actually suffocate and not make it out.
Yep. And then for lockdown, so day 14, day 15, depending on which day you count as day one, um, you're going to increase the humidity. And what happens if your humidity is too high?
Um, it could actually suffocate them and make the membranes super sticky.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So basically, you're just trapping the chicks right in their shell. So, yeah, it's important to keep an eye on your humidity and your temperature. And it's also important to keep those stable. So, lots of fluctuations back and forth. I see people that have a hard time keeping their incubator at a proper temperature, or they're constantly adding water and the humidity is going back and forth. That's kind of difficult. It can make it harder for those eggs to develop as well. Um, I know some people will like wrap blankets or towels or styrofoam
Right.
around their tabletop incubators. One problem that I see with that is a lot of times they'll cover up the air vents. And
Yeah, and that can become a big problem.
yeah, they do need fresh air. You do need that vent to bring in the fresh air. So if you do wrap them, that's great. Just make sure you're leaving some air holes.
Right. And something else I wanted to point out too is I've had people where they've had successful hatches with chicken eggs and then they go to incubate
Mhm.
quail eggs and they have problems. And a
Yes.
lot of times, so if you think of the volume of that egg, compare like a chicken egg compared to a quail egg's much smaller. So it's going to um, get affected faster by temperature, humidity fluctuations versus a larger volume egg like a chicken egg. So you have to take that
Mhm.
into consideration too.
Absolutely. And that especially plays a role if people want to candle their eggs.
Yes.
So, candling is the process of taking them out and shining a light in them to see if, what's happening inside the egg as far as development. And I have had people that have candled every day.
Yeah.
And,
I know everybody's excited and they
yes.
can't wait. I was the first time too. I just couldn't wait. It was like Christmas.
Well, and it's fun. It is really cool to see the little veins and the little embryo and watch him
Right.
move and all that stuff. But unfortunately, every time you're doing that, you're changing the humidity, you're changing the temperature. I don't know about you, but I've dropped some eggs before and it breaks my
Yeah.
heart. Here
Yeah.
they are, they're developing nicely, and you can see the little embryo inside, and then you drop it.
Yeah.
Um, Not to mention the fact that, we can have bacteria on our hands that can
And
enter the
then transfer
porous.
it. Yeah.
Mhm.
Right inside the incubator.
Yep. So, speaking about bacteria in the incubator, you know what I'm going to talk about next.
They need to be clean
Yep.
in between every hatch.
Yes. Yes. It's really important. Those eggshells are porous, and bacteria can get inside of them and can cause your egg to develop or to not develop or to even rot,
Yeah.
which is no good.
And they stink when they rot.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay, we've talked about temperature, we've talked about humidity. What else?
Clean incubators.
Hmm.
Oh, opening up the incubator.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. We talked about that a little bit with candling, but we do need to talk about it with hatching.
Yes. Because I know we're all excited. We want to get the cute little fluff balls out and move on to the
Mhm.
next step, but it can be
Yep.
detrimental to the other eggs.
It's really good to know that you're not hurting the chick by leaving it in there. I know that everybody's excited and they want to hold the chick and they want to get it food and water right away. But they have a little yolk sac that they've absorbed that they're still feeding on internally, and they're okay. But if you open that incubator to retrieve the hatched chicks, it can be detrimental to the ones that are still in the process of hatching. So that's you'll sometimes see the term shrink wrapped, and that's where the humidity change causes that inner membrane to like suck down around the chick, and it pretty much traps them in and can even like cover up their little nostrils and suffocate them.
Yep. It's sad
So
to see it. I've seen it
it
once
is.
and it's really sad because those chicks would have usually made it out just fine on their own.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, so we talked about lockdown, but we didn't really talk about the process of lockdown and like what we should do to prevent some potential
Foot
defects.
issues?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so a big one I get questions about is and people always think they're genetic and occasionally they are, but most of the time they are not. And that's curled toes and splay leg.
Mhm.
So if those babies, if you don't offer them a good grippy surface to hatch out onto, there's a good chance that either one of those could happen.
Yep.
Because they've been cramped inside of an egg and they're pushing their way out and they get on the surface and if it's slick, it's like going on an ice skating rink.
Yep. Yep. They're doing the splits, and their poor little muscles and joints aren't developed enough to be able to hold them back together, and they just kind of end up stuck that way.
Yeah, and it's sad to see.
Yes. So what do you recommend for people to put down for that grippy surface?
Our favorite thing is using the non-skid shelf liners,
Mhm.
and they're easy to
Yep,
clean too, and they're cheap.
absolutely.
So if you don't want to clean them, you could throw a new one in.
Absolutely. That gives them a little bit of traction so they can come out of the shell and get their feet up under them. What about assisted hatching? What
Don't do it.
about
Just don't do it. You can watch our other episode on it.
Yep,
Just
yep.
don't do it.
We did a whole episode on that. But yeah, even though it's hard, you know, like we said, you're excited or you're worried. It takes a long time to hatch.
And it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. They get tired. They have to take a break. They have to move around and reposition and stuff. But all of that is prepping them for life in the big wide world. They're pushing on the inside of the egg. They're getting stronger, absorbing that yolk sac. And then, there's also like blood in the shell membrane that is getting absorbed. Like there's a whole process that has to happen. So if we try to speed up that process, sometimes it doesn't end very well.
Usually doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah. Not to mention the fact that we're probably opening the incubator and then shrink wrapping the other chicks.
Exactly. And a lot of times, if that chick's not going to hatch, there's a reason.
Mhm. Yeah. Sometimes they're just weak. Sometimes the cells didn't develop right and they're just not made right. Or sometimes because of the incubation issues, they're just not going to make it.
Right. So, what's a staggered hatch?
Yeah, this is another big thing. So if you have chicks that are hatching early and then some more and then some more and some more and some more over a period of days, that's a staggered hatch. Okay. And what that tells me when people report that is that there are hot spots and cold spots in the incubator.
Right. Because those chicks should honestly be popping out like popcorn. They're going to just go off
Yep.
and one right after the other. And if they're not, there's definitely temperature problems going on.
Yep. And another thing that I see are chicks that hatch with an unabsorbed yolk. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so when the yolk doesn't absorb, they kind of get this weird squishy thing out of their abdomen. And what that's generally caused from is your incubator being too warm. And when it happens, they hatch earlier than they should, and they haven't had time to absorb that.
Right.
So that's a time to get that secondary thermometer out.
Right.
Check your
And a lot
incubator.
of times when that happens too, they tend to have failure to thrive issues.
Yeah. I've seen, even if they absorb the yolk, a lot of times they have a hernia in that
Yeah,
spot.
I've seen that too.
Yeah. So, um, definitely when you see a staggered hatch or chicks hatching early or even hatching late. So that's the other thing. If they're hatching late, your
Right.
incubator's too cold.
Right.
So, when you see that they're not hatching exactly on day 17 or day 18, um, that's a clue for you to get that thermometer out and be checking around.
Yes, but you should check it at the get-go.
Yes, always, always. Um, one thing that we didn't talk about is where to put your incubator.
Yeah, that's a really important one.
Mm-hmm.
Because you don't want it by a window. You don't want it in drafty areas.
Yep. You also don't want to put it outside or in your garage. So, um, you want someplace for that where that incubator is going to be in a temperature controlled environment, so it doesn't have to work so hard.
Right.
And if you have it sitting by your window and the sun's shining through, that's going to be heating up your incubator.
Cooking
Vent's
the
going to be,
eggs.
yeah, yeah. So you want someplace where It is in a controlled environment, preferably someplace that is out of reach of small children and pets.
The pets.
The pets. I've had more than one person that has had a kitty
Yeah.
knock an incubator off of a table. I've had dogs unplug the incubator by going under the table.
Yeah, I've had someone who their chicks were already hatching and the cat knocked it
Oh,
and ate some of them. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So all the things. um, so I think it's also important, if we want to troubleshoot the hatch, to after the chicks that have hatched are done and you've removed them, it's important to take a look at the eggs that are left and
Yes.
take a look and see how many started to develop and where in development did they stop developing.
Right.
It tells you a lot.
Yeah, that can tell you a huge story.
Mhm. Yeah, if they all, if you had some that developed in the beginning and then stopped, well, then you can look at the beginning of your incubation. Did you lose power? That's something we didn't talk about. Losing power.
Right. Yeah.
I've had that happen.
Yeah. I hear too many times. That's for sure.
Yes. Did you open the incubator and candle the eggs? Was there something that happened along those lines? And then towards the end of incubation, it tends to be a humidity thing,
Yeah,
is what I see.
usually.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. And then, of course, all of these things that we have talked about could cause them to not start to develop in the first place.
Yes.
So back to that whole thing that we started with lack of development does not mean lack of fertility.
Exactly.
If
There
your
just could have
temperature,
been one part of the whole equation that just wasn't
yes,
right to get those guys off to a good start.
yep, just like baking, you have too much of an ingredient or not enough of an ingredient, or you don't have the temperature set right, your cookies are not going to come out right.
Right.
Now I'm
We have to
hungry.
have good cookies.
Now I want some cookies.
Yeah.
Well, I hope this has been helpful. And if you have other ideas about troubleshooting or want to share your success stories of your hatch, please drop us a comment. Have a great night.
Bye.